Welcome everybody to the summit, Harness Your Creative Power. My special guest today is David Parrish. Hello, David, and welcome.
Hello to everybody. I'm delighted to be here.
Let me introduce you briefly for everybody who doesn't know who you are. So David is a creative industries speaker, a trainer, consultant, author, and a TEDx speaker. These are probably the key words. I guess there is much more to you and to your work than that, but this is just briefly to know, for you to know who David is and how he works or what he works. Now, David, how did you arrive at that place here, speaker, creative industries? How come that you are working in that field? And maybe you also explain what creative industries are. I'm not sure that everybody knows.
Okay, so just to summarize the creative industries and what I do, following on from your introduction, I help people who regard themselves as creative to be more businesslike. So the creative industries are those businesses based on artistic creativity of some kind. So clearly the artist, but also the designers, architects, people in music, filmmakers, etc. These businesses are regarded the certain issues are creative industries. And very often people in these businesses are extremely talented in film or architecture or music or design, but they don't always have a business background, and that's where I come in. I help them to be more business-like, to combine their creative passion and talents with smart business thinking. So that's what I do as a speaker, as a trainer, and a consultant, and a writer, because I've written 2 books. The next part of the answer to your question is how did I get here? Well, it's been a long journey. I'm not as young as I look, and over many years, I've learned a lot about business. I think it's important that people know where I'm coming from. And my starting point when I was a lot younger, about 20, 22, along with some friends, we set up a community project. It was a community bookshop in my small town near Manchester in England. And we did it out of pure enthusiasm and naivety. We wanted a bookshop to be there to share information so that people could get access to, obviously, to books, but information to empower people. And we didn't really think of it as a business. In fact, in those days, business for me was a dirty word. Business for me, and you have to imagine me with hair, actually with long hair and a beard. Business was not something we wanted to do. Business was something corrupting, exploitative, etc. Ironically, though, even managing a small community bookshop, I had to learn very quickly about things like contracts, cash flow, managing people, speaking with bank managers and accountants, all these things. And so I gradually came to realize that knowing about business is very useful. It doesn't mean that you have to become a particular kind of business person or an arch capitalist or somebody who's bad in any way, because we can use the tools of business for any purpose, for a charity, for a campaign, for politics, for business, of course, but in many different directions. So I learned a lot about business from making lots of mistakes. I have probably made all the mistakes you can make in business. I came at business reluctantly, but now I've come to realize that, if we can combine creative talent with smart business thinking, we can achieve tremendous success. So I learned the different jobs I had, and then eventually went to university for the first time, age 35, just a few years ago, to study for the MBA, to learn about business formally and academically, to combine that with my life experience. So that's broadly my journey, and now I work as a consultant because it's easier than working for a living in a proper job.
Okay, so what attracted you to the creative part, or to the creators, to the creative people. I mean, the business part I hear, but you are specialized now, as you said, supporting creative people. Where does the creative side come in?
Well, I think we're all creative in different ways, and we can talk in a moment about what do we mean exactly by creativity and the different dimensions of creativity. If people want to challenge me about my creative or artistic credentials, then I can tell you that I'm a published poet. I don't really claim to be a great poet, and my publishing is minimal. But I do like to write poetry whenever I can, and so I guess that is my claim to some artistic credentials. I worked in book selling in the job I mentioned when we set up a business. I then worked in book publishing and then in book marketing and distribution. So I've worked through the book trade in marketing and publishing, and it was subsequently that this definition of the creative industries was coined actually in the UK in the late 90s. And I realized that I was working in the creative industries before the creative industries were invented. Of course, there's always been theatre, etc., but the definition of creative industries is quite new. So with my background in the creative industries and a little bit of artistic credentials, I can relate very well to people in those creative businesses. From they're in business, but sometimes reluctantly in business, and they trust me because I've come from the creative industries, etc.
Yeah, so the business part is combined with the creative part, and what I hear being poet and books and writing. So this is what I hear where your creative part comes in, right? And you must have been attracted to the creative world, or else you would have probably found another business area.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like the arts and culture, the artistic world. I don't claim to have any great talents, but I've tried my hand at painting, and many of my friends and the society and the culture I come from is very much about creativity. So yeah, I'm very much into arts, creativity, and culture in that sense. And as I say, that helps me to establish a rapport with creative people in business because they trust me more. I'm not just a kind of a man in a suit talking about business to them. I'm somebody who's probably been on a similar journey to them, and I understand their values and their ambitions.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Let's talk a little bit about creativity. What is creativity for you? How would you define it? How do you see creativity? Question mark.
Well, it's a great question, and I think that the word creativity is actually a troublesome word. I think that because any word that means different things to different people can cause problems with communication and understanding. And although I work in the creative industries and I talk about creativity a lot, it's a big word in my vocabulary, I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding about creativity. And so you mentioned I was a TEDx speaker, and my first TEDx talk gave me an opportunity to talk about creativity. It gave me an opportunity to think through what was troubling me about the word. And I came to the conclusion, and I talked about it at the TEDx in Napoli, that really we should have two definitions of creativity. There is what I call artistic creativity, and let's call that A creativity, using the word letter A. And that is what everybody understands to be the creativity of Shakespeare and Goethe and Michelangelo and Leonardo and Mozart, etc. Everybody realizes that the arts are creative. The problem is that the word creativity, I think, has been hijacked by the artists, so that many people think they're not creative because they're not artistic. So ironically, I can have a conversation with a chief executive of a manufacturing company, and he or she might tell me, oh, I'm not creative. What they mean is that when they were at school, they were rubbish at art, and they can't draw.
They were told they were rubbish.
Yes, yeah, they were told after, and this is another issue, they were told they were rubbish at art or poetry or whatever, theatre. So they come to the conclusion they're not creative. Now, they probably are anyway in artistic terms, but ironically, this same person, this chief executive, is every day solving problems, inventing new products, thinking outside the box, dealing with issues. They are tremendously creative. Now, in their work, they might not be artistically creative, but they are creative in an ingenious way. So I suggest we have this second word, and I label it I creativity, using the letter I for ingenuity or innovation. And this is a kind of creativity that is much more general and is everywhere, actually, in all fields of human endeavor, in manufacturing, in business, in banking, in agriculture, in warfare, in healthcare, etc. So I think that maybe we need to differentiate between purely artistic creativity on the one hand and the more general kind of ingenuity that we find everywhere, actually. Yeah. So this helps to, I hope that, my suggestion of having two words, it hasn't yet been adopted by the Oxford English Dictionary, but I hope it helps solve some of the misunderstandings and problems we have when we're communicating about creativity.
Yeah, because I looked it up in the dictionary, ingenuity, and I found it was explained as creativity. So, yeah, but I hear what you're saying. So what you want to, where you want to separate is the art, really, that being creative doesn't mean that I'm a painter or a musician or that I do some artwork. Yeah, being creative, as you said, is also linked, or you linked it, that's what I heard, to problem solving. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, and as I say in my book, my first book, T-Shirts and Suits, The Guide to the Business of Creativity, I say that creativity is not the monopoly of the artist.
Yeah.
Clearly, artists are creative, but that's just one kind of creativity. Absolutely. And then there is the more general creativity we find everywhere, and people are creative whether they realize it or not.
Yeah.
Whether they are artistic or not.
Yeah. I mean, we create all of the time. Whatever we do, every communication now, what we are doing here is a creative action. Yeah.
Absolutely.
If I go later on into my kitchen and cook, I would call this creative as well. So
yes,
it is also, let's say, producing something or bringing something about. I'm sorry, I didn't read your book, so maybe it's a little bit redundant for what I'm saying here. But yes.
I mean, one thing that troubles me a bit, dismays me actually, is that very often, because I'm working with creative people, creative businesses, for example, an artist, a designer, animator, somebody making computer games, whatever, very often they're extremely creative artistically, this creativity in their studio. But when they go into their business office, because they have to do some of the business stuff, they kind of switch off their creativity. And they don't think there's any scope for creativity in doing business. Whereas I think we can apply creativity to the business office. And then we can be creative in business as well. We can find new ways to talk with our clients. We can find new ways to raise money. We can find new ways to work in partnership with other businesses. And so I think there's, we can use creativity in the studio, but then also use creativity in the business office. And I guess that's where I come in. I don't tell the illustrator how to be a better illustrator, but I help them to find ways to do business that fit with their values, their style, their ambition. And we do that by being creative in the realm of business.
Right. Yeah, this is where your creativity comes into, because if I think of artists, the ones you just described, very often they are not interested in this other world, this other creative world where you come in, or it's difficult for them to make the same kind of communication that they can make with their colors or something. So it's good to have two sides of it, as you say, the A and the I. So and also
Absolutely.
different people who can work together.
Yes, yeah. And I think sometimes creative people, artistically creative people, if you know what I should be more specific, you know, the artists, shall we say, in general, are suspicious of business. They think that if they become more business-like, then they're somehow selling out, selling their soul to the devil, that somehow to be business-like is to corrupt them. And of course it can do if you do it wrongly. If you take the advice you get from many people, you know, they will say, oh, don't do these paintings, make pretty paintings because they will sell better. And that would be selling out. But actually we can combine, I know that we can combine the artistic integrity with smart business thinking. And then they can have the best of both worlds. They can not sell out, they can be true to their values and commercially successful. And that's a win-win that everybody would like.
Yeah, I mean, there in the word creativity is then also authenticity. So the artist wants to stay true to his art and not change his art because of selling or because of the other world outside.
Absolutely, yes, and I fully understand that, and I reassure them that I'm not going to try to change their values, their integrity. Their integrity is crucial, but it doesn't mean that, you know, we can't do business. We can find clever, imaginative, ingenious ways to do business with the right customers, and then they can be true to their, you know, integrity and make money. And, you know, it's not always simple, but yes, we can do both. We can combine these two things.
Yeah, and both is creative. I mean, to come back to the word creativity, it's it's both. I looked at the TEDx and I heard you talk about crisis, or somewhere I'm not sure.
Yes, you're right. You're right. The theme of that TEDx.
Pardon?
Yes, you're right, because the theme of the TEDx event in Naples was creativity and crisis. So that was the overall theme of the event, and I spoke specifically about A, creativity, and I, creativity.
Yeah, and would you link crisis to creative action, or was it just in that talk, or is it more general that you feel that a crisis brings creativity about, or demands creative solutions, or where is crisis coming into the idea of creativity?
Well, I think crisis can provoke fantastic creativity. Not always. It depends on how we approach a crisis. And, you know, as many people have said, I believe the Chinese word for crisis is a combination of two words, danger and opportunity. And I think that's a great way to think about crisis. Yes, a danger, something's happening, something unexpected, something we're not comfortable with. But within that problem, shall we say, is also opportunity. And I also really like the phrase, never waste a crisis, because in crisis there is opportunity. And so I think that, you know, we don't have to provoke a crisis. We don't need to have crisis to be creative. But if a crisis comes, we can choose. We can choose to panic, to freeze, to do nothing, or we can choose to find a way out of it. And in finding this way out, we often, you know, stumble across or through necessity, invent something new, a new way of dealing with things. It might be a new product or service in business, but it might be a new way of survival in other contexts. And so I think that crisis can be a great mother of creativity. Just like they say necessity is the mother of invention, we might say that crisis helps creativity.
Yeah, but it's not necessary. We don't need a crisis in order to be creative.
No, we don't. Although what is interesting actually is that we can kind of imagine a crisis. And so when I'm helping businesses to be more creative, we have various techniques and tools to use. And one of those is to imagine a crisis.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And
Interesting.
so, we don't have to wait for a real crisis to hit us hard. We can imagine one. I can invent one in the boardroom or in the workshop, and say, okay, what would we do if tomorrow there was a hurricane? I'm saying that because I'm in Guatemala. There's a volcano across there. What if the volcano erupts? Now, this doesn't happen very often in Europe, but what would happen? And it is amazing because it then starts people thinking differently. And because, in a way, the more outrageous the crisis is that I invent, the more they are allowed and permitted to think creatively. Mm-hmm. Because in businesses, people are, there's a norm, there's a normal way of doing things. There are acceptable ideas and unacceptable ideas. But if I shake things up and say, okay, your business is steady, it's good, we do things nicely. But what would we do if there was an earthquake in Sheffield? What would we do if some volcano erupted or a meteor hit Europe? And this sounds quite silly, but it's a serious game, shall we say? And then people start thinking amazing things. It gives them permission to be creative, almost to be silly. Well, I guess we would have to, find new customers because half our customers will be dead. What would we do then? Our headquarters would have vanished. We wouldn't have any offices, but surely the business survives because the office is not the business. Mm-hmm. And I'm just making this up, but you can imagine that by inventing a crisis just theoretically, it provokes quite imaginative things that we could do, not only if that crisis really did happen, but things we could do anyway tomorrow to improve our situation.
Yeah, and I try listening to you. I try to transfer it onto a daily situation because our listeners here are people as well who want to be more creative in their daily life. And I was just thinking, is there a transfer possible to bring this idea of crisis into, or the imagined crisis into daily life to be more creative? Not just in business. Do you have an idea there?
Yeah, I guess so. Again, this is not exactly my speciality, but I think we could do. We could ask ourselves, these questions. We could invent these crises in order to prepare for them, but also to think differently. So, we can, as they say, hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. We could say, what if tomorrow my health took a turn for the worse? What if I had a big health problem tomorrow? Yes. Now, I would need to rely on friends and family more. Yeah. Perhaps it would be useful to be near a hospital. Or if I wasn't near a hospital, what would I do? And so I think even in personal life or other contexts, we can invent these crises in order to think, what would we do? And in doing that, we might invent or think of new ways of acting in our normal lives. Even without that crisis happening, we might decide that we're going to do things differently. And yeah, I think we can imagine situations in order to provoke ourselves to think about problem solving and acting differently.
Yeah, well, this is what comes to my mind. It is problem solving. Yeah? It's finding a solution or different solutions or to imagined problems. Yeah. Well, the word inspiration, does it have a place there as well? I'm just thinking, how can I link being inspired to what you just proposed with the crisis? Is there a
I think there is a connection because one way to be more creative is to imagine a crisis and how we would solve it. This is a kind of drastic,
Yes.
way of doing things. But the other way is to put ourselves into different environments, meet different people. And so we're often inspired when we meet people who tell us things we didn't know,
Yeah.
or who have a different way of looking at the world. So, our conversation now, me as a business consultant and you as a psychotherapist, you would give me insights. And I'm sure if we had time to talk further, I would be inspired because I would start to see the world differently. I would get new perspectives. And this is a good way to be more creative and to be inspired, to meet other people, to get out of our comfort zone.
Exactly.
I remember going to an event. It was a social event in Manchester. It was a creative industries event. We had a great speaker and then lots of wine and, talking, very nice. And all the people there were from the creative industries. In other words, they were all designers and music people and architects. And that's great because they can help each other, etc. And when I was drinking my wine, I spoke to a young woman and I said, "Tell me, what's your business?" She said, "I'm a civil engineer."
Mm-hmm.
And my first reaction was, "Oh, you've come to the wrong place, by accident. This is not for civil engineers." But I didn't say that. That would be quite rude. I simply said, "Interesting. Tell me why you're here." And she said, "Because I go to so many events and conferences for civil engineers, and everybody is talking about the same thing in the same way, and I no longer learn anything. So I thought I would come here to meet these creative people, to learn something new, to look at the world in a different way, to be inspired." And I thought, wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
And then I looked around the room at 200 people from the creative industries, and I thought, how creative are they really? How often do those 200 people say, "Tomorrow I'm going to go to a conference of civil engineers or dentists or psychotherapists or train drivers"? Not very often.
No.
And I think it's when we put ourselves out of our comfort zone into different contexts, meet different people with different views in different professions, but also in different cultures, we start to get creative inspiration.
Yeah. And
so I think we should get out more.
yeah, and expand. And maybe it's a good invitation also for everybody who's listening to do something different every day. And if it is only a tiny little thing to do something different than the ordinary, as you say, it will change our perspective, it will expand our perspective, and we will learn something new, but we always, and I can say this, we'll learn something new about ourselves. This is what happened to me here with the summit, talking to so many interesting people. Each time I learn something about myself as well, and that's what we all would do if we would do something different than yesterday. And that's Absolutely. A good invitation. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's when different things come together that creativity happens. It's when a psychotherapist speaks to the business advisor. It's when somebody from a Latin American culture speaks with somebody from a Southeast Asian culture. Yeah. That's the differences spark some kind of new idea.
Yeah.
If we talk only with people with whom we're familiar, the same old people, we do the same old things, it's more difficult to become inspired and to be creative. So I think we need to do these things and then also give it time, because everybody knows that the best ideas come when you're walking in the park or in the shower, when you're not trying to be creative. Yes, we can try to be creative in a workshop situation, and I do that. But sometimes just when we are relaxing, that these different experiences come together. Something the civil engineer said 3 weeks ago combines with something that I learned in Guatemala, and wow, I never, it's a new idea.
Yeah.
So we need to collect these new ideas and give them time to brew, to to combine.
Yeah. And we need to be open for doing that. Yeah. So
Yes.
there is an openness required to have different ideas come in and make associations with what we already know, so that we can learn and continue.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Now, then I will ask you, what is intuition for you?
That's a good one, and I don't have a ready answer.
It's not necessary.
But I mean, I think, and you will know much better than me, I think very often it's the subconscious. I think that we just get a feeling something is bad here. We don't know why, and some people put it down to, spirit or pure intuition or something. But I think very often it's because there's something we can't quite remember exactly that has happened before, and makes us feel uncomfortable, or indeed positive. It's not just negative intuition. And so it could be something quite spiritual, but I think it's probably also likely to be something quite functional, a distant memory, some experience that we can't quite recollect, but is somehow sending us signals that something is good or bad, that something should happen. But yeah, I'm out of my depth on this one. So, but I'm interested to know your answer to that now or later.
Well, there are many different interpretations of what intuition is, depending on where we come from. The scientific view tends more to even go to the subconscious idea, or the memories, or everything we have learned, because we are learning all of the time, uninterruptedly, but not always in a conscious way. So sometimes we can access everything that we have seen, because it's already there, somehow stored, or rather here, not there. I point to my belly, but there is the connection there. And of course, there are a lot of people who also believe that there is an unlimited information around us. Everything that has been said and has been thought is there around us, a big pool of possibilities and opportunities, and we just need to line up with that. So there are different views. For me as a psychologist, I have to say, I think it is related to my experience, to my life experience, that I have rehearsed certain situations subconsciously, unconsciously, so often that I can very quickly in a moment know yes or no, good or bad, I want this, or rather not. Mm-hmm. So this is my view on that. But there are different views, very different views. But my question to you then, as creative industries man, would you say you use your intuition in your work?
Yes, I do. I probably use it even when I don't realize I'm using it, because intuition works at that subconscious level. But I think certainly in the interpersonal situation, I'm often, because I deal with clients, I'm having long conversations, interviews. So I'm, constantly picking up, am I getting the message across? Are they comfortable with me? Is something right, going well here or not? And also in a training workshop situation, sometimes you can sense that people are getting restless. And I'm thinking, is it that I'm boring them? Or actually, is it time for a coffee? Because, and so, I think constantly in all of us in interpersonal relationships, we're picking up on body language and tone of voice, and getting a sense of whether the conversation is going well and is being productive. I guess I use it a little bit as well when I'm thinking about my own business. What do I do next? Should I write a third book? Should I, should I do more work overseas? Should I get an office assistant or a virtual assistant. And I'm aware that sometimes an idea sounds good intellectually. I can't fault it. But there's something that I'm not comfortable with. And at first I can't tell why. But then when I think about it, you know, consciously, when I deliberately think, why am I feeling uncomfortable about this idea? Or on the other side, you know, more positively, why am I so enthusiastic about this idea when it doesn't really make business sense? And there's some intuition going on. There's something happening that I can't immediately recognize, but I give myself time to think it through, to identify it, and then I can realize, yeah, there is a potential problem, even though this is a cool idea. Or even though it's not a logical business idea, there's something very energizing about it, something that excites me. And so, you know, I'm going to go with it anyway. And luckily, I am my own boss. I can decide what I do. I don't have to get approval from anybody, which is good on the whole, sometimes not so good. But so, yeah, I guess we all use intuition, whether we realize it or not. And those are a couple of examples where at least I realize I'm using intuition.
Yeah, and what I hear from you is that you link it to your feelings. Yeah, you feel in a certain way, or you're enthusiastic, or you feel no. So for you, then I would say intuition is linked or perceived through your feelings. And then after a while, you think about it as well. So then the intellectual side comes in. So this is what.
Yeah, I think that's a fair interpretation of what I said. I guess other people might think about intuition totally differently, but that's my my take on it. Yeah.
Yeah. And what is important is that we listen to it. Yeah, that you listen to what you just described, however it feels. And to be enthusiastic, in my view, is definitely an intuitive hint, or it's something that we should follow up and go and look what it is. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So I have the word empowerment. I don't know how this relates to your world or to your work. What does empowerment mean for you?
Well, it's a great word, and I do use it, and I think it relates very centrally, very crucially to my work, because my mission, when I think about it, is to empower creative entrepreneurs. So I'm a business consultant, but my personal philosophy is not to make them dependent on me, but to make them independent of me. Now that kind of sounds stupid in the business sense because I'm making myself redundant, but really I don't want creative people to be dependent on business consultants to make decisions for them or help them to make decisions. I want them to be more powerful, to be more independent, to be more ready to face challenges and take opportunities. So my job is, you know, essentially it's a kind of teaching or coaching role, and that is about, you know, empowering others. And that's, you know, that's, I realize where I get a lot of satisfaction. That's what, you know, makes me happy deep inside, and, you know, gives me that sense of well-being. I deliberately, in my books and my talks, don't use business jargon, because sometimes you have to, of course, but, you know, the purpose of my talks and my books isn't to show how clever I am and how stupid the audience is. It's quite the opposite. I want them to feel comfortable, and it thrills me very deeply in a workshop or a speech when people say, wow, I get it now. You've explained it in a way people don't. Now I know why I should do a cash flow. Now I know what people mean by strategic partnership. Now I understand why I must protect my intellectual property. And, you know, if they think that they've thought of it, or they, you know, that is good. It's not about my glory or my, you know, showing how clever I am. It's It's the opposite. And I guess sometimes they might think, why are we paying this guy? You know, we thought of it ourselves. He's been for several meetings. He's talked about business, and we came to the conclusion that we need to find different markets. We came to the conclusion that we need a strategic alliance. What did he do? And that's a great way of coaching.
So how do you empower the people?
Well, somebody once said, you know, I ask smart questions.
Okay.
And I think a lot of my work as a consultant is, you know, coaching, almost like counseling in some ways. In other words, sometimes, you know, the answer is quite obvious to me, but and I'm tempted to say, look, I'm clever. I've been here before. I know this situation. This is the answer. But that doesn't empower people.
No.
And so sometimes it's better to take a bit longer and to say, to ask them, what do you think the options are for your business right now? And they might talk about 3 or 4 different directions. And I might add another one. And I might say, talk me through the pros and cons of each one. And after maybe an hour or longer, they say, you know, David, I think we need to focus on a different market. And then everything would click into place. And I say, maybe you're right. Now, maybe I knew that an hour ago, but that's not the point. The point is that they thought it through for themselves. They are convinced in their own minds for their own reasons. And that's more likely that they will do it. Certainly they understand it, and they are more empowered in that way because they did it themselves. And all I did was tease out the answer that is already inside them. And I always take the view the answers are already in the business. It's not that I come along with a totally different answer. The answers are already there. They're just so jumbled together. They're just so hidden by all sorts of other stuff. And my job is to take away the stuff so that the answers already existing are revealed. I don't compare myself to Michelangelo. That would be very immodest of me. But he once said, you know, the sculpture is already in the marble. My job is simply to take away the bits of marble that aren't needed, which is a beautiful way of, you know, of saying it.
And for that, the art is, or the creativity is for you to ask the right questions and be patient until the other side comes up with their answers, so that in my language they own it. Really, it's theirs.
Absolutely, they own it. It's theirs. Absolutely, and as you say, patience is needed. It's actually more hard work to listen than to talk. And you know, sometimes at the end of the day, you know, I've got a real headache, and I have hardly said anything. Because I have to listen attentively and think of the next question or prompt to guide people. So them owning it, the solution, is crucial, and that's very much what I think about in terms of empowerment and empowering my client.
I understand this very well because I'm working in a very
this
similar way, and what. The work is to really listen to what is said, so that you can come up with the next right question then there. So one more word, success. I mean, you have said a little bit about it already, and that for you it's not important to shine, or what does success mean then for you? What is success?
Well, I can tell you about me, but I think just in general, the word success is central really to all of my work, because when I start as a business advisor, working with the clients, but also in speeches and workshops, my first question is, do you want to be successful? And they look at me as if they say, of course, what a stupid question. Are we paying you for this kind of question? But then the second question is, how exactly do you define success?
Yeah.
And that is a much more complex question.
Yeah.
And people often don't have a very good answer for it. In business, they just say, well, we just want to be bigger and we just want more of the same. And when I ask further questions, they come to realize exactly what is important for them. And yes, money is often part of it because money is useful. But, you know, I've never heard a business say that money is the only thing, especially in the creative industries. Yes, we want to have money, but we want to work on cool projects. We want to get the respect of our peers. We want to work in teams. We want some international collaborations. We want to win an award. We want to be the best employer in the city. So there are many, many different dimensions of success. And you can imagine I've asked this question many times and heard many answers. And I've asked the question in workshops. And sometimes in the workshop, while people are sitting in groups discussing this or writing quietly, I ask myself.
Yeah,
this comes back to my that was a preamble to my answer to your question, which is, what about you, David? This is your question. Well, I've come to realize in thinking about that question myself that for me, yes, money is important, but not the most important thing. I'm not prepared to do anything just for money, but it's nice to have money, of course. For me, autonomy is extremely important. The fact that I can choose which projects to do, which clients to do, where to travel to, is crucial for me. The idea, my nightmare, you know, to put it the other way around, my nightmare will be to have a boss to whom I have to go and say, you know, they've invited me to a conference in Guatemala. It doesn't pay very well, but I'd really like to go because I will learn something, I will share something. It's an interesting place, an interesting project. And then for my boss to say, no, it's not profitable enough. Or no, you can't go, I'm going to send somebody else. This is my nightmare. So I'm in the opposite situation where I can decide what I do, what I don't do. And that for me is probably the most important thing. The success of my clients, you know, I'm lucky enough that I get a lot of positive feedback, and that's a measure of success. If I stop getting that, then I'm going to be less happy. So yeah, there are many dimensions, but feeling that I'm doing something, sharing something, sharing my experience, that's very important. The autonomy within my business is important, and money is useful too. Yeah.
So the fact that you are where you are right now is a proof that you are successful. Yeah.
Yeah, it ticks my boxes. Yeah, for other people it might not work, but
no, but for you, we have
to work to our own definition of success. Absolutely, and this is, again, is a strong message from me to my clients. Don't be successful in other people's terms. No. Other people will constantly advise you what you should do, but they're imposing on you their definition of success and then giving you sincere advice. But you must be very clear for yourself what you mean by success, and then you can filter the advice accordingly and, you know, politely decline the advice if it doesn't work for you. So we each need to be clear about our own definition of success, and then and so I'm becoming clearer. I'm pretty clear, and, you know, constantly become clearer about that. And I think I'm successful in my terms. Whatever other people might think of me, I don't really care, and none of us should care.
Yeah, and I think this is a good message also to everybody who's listening here, maybe to take a moment and think about what success would mean in your life. And then go from there.
Absolutely. It's you know, it's a good starting point for any business plan or any project at all, personal or business. And then it becomes a guiding light. It helps us to decide day by day, month by month what we should do and what we should not do, because we're constantly having to make choices. We have more options than we can possibly do. But if we know where we're trying to get to, then we can decide which is the best route.
Right. And it might change on the way. It might not be a straight line. It might go maybe a little bit to the left and maybe a little bit to the right. But the goal over there is probably the
absolutely, yeah. If we're clear about the destination, we can choose the route according to circumstances. So we can't always plan the route in detail. I'm traveling in Central America right now, and one of the ferries was cancelled. So, you know, I still knew I wanted to get to Belize, but I thought I'm going to have to go overland. So, but, you know, that's a great analogy for life and business.
Right, and creativity.
Absolutely, yeah. You have to be open to new ideas.
Yeah.
And think, you know, what's the opportunity here? Yeah. You know, it's different than I expected, but I can be creative. I can think of a solution, and actually, there might be some bonuses within that solution. So, open-mindedness, yes.
David, we're coming slowly to an end here with our very interesting conversation, and I wanted to ask you if there's something in particular, something that you would like to say to our listeners, to our audience coming from you here. I wanted to give you the opportunity to do that.
Well, I think one is to be clear about your own definition of success, just to repeat what we said a moment ago, but that is, a general conclusion that I would offer anyway. And then also to be proud of your differences. An artist friend of mine says, your difference is your strength. I think because we're herd animals, we tend to do what everybody else does. But I think sometimes if we listen to our intuition, we're clear about our goals and success, we can do things our own particular way. We can live life differently, but also we can maybe do our art or designs or architecture differently in a way that other people can't. And this actually gives us some advantage in business to do what only you can do and then find a market for it. So yeah, it's to find your own particular way and not just to follow others. I think is my general advice.
Okay, thank you. I know you are not prepared for that and it will not happen, but if I had known before that you write poetry, I would have asked you at this point to read one of your poems, but this is not possible here today.
I'd rather not, but maybe later.
Maybe later. Anyway, I thank you so much, and I hope you find your way through the countries where you have to go to, and that you enjoy the rest of the day. And I want to thank everybody who was listening here and watching here today for being here, and see you soon.
Okay.
Bye-bye, and thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a delight to talk with you.